Добро пожаловать в штаб-квартире Бинков.
Welcome to Binkov's HQ. France, of course, is a European military powerhouse. It spends more on defense, or should we say offense, in certain occasions when operating around the world. It also upkeeps a nuclear arsenal, which isn't cheap. Spain, on the other hand, is a much smaller spender, mostly paying up for its local defense. Question is, could the French military defeat Spain? First, a bit of a historical interlude, sponsored by Vikings War of Clans. Did you know that both the French and Spanish were subject to frequent Viking raids in medieval times? The mobile game Vikings War of Clans puts you in charge of a Viking settlement and lets you raid away. It's inspired by the famous strategy and city building games of the 90s that we all loved and played, like the Settlers or Caesar series. The Viking world is so addictive due to over 20 million online players, constantly changing the way the game evolves. Compete in live events, join never-ending fights over resources, and forge new alliances. Help support my channel by downloading Vikings for free, only from my links shown in the description box below. You'll get a special bonus of 200 gold coins and a protective shield, which will be extremely useful for starting the game. Join my Vikings clan. Look me up under the nickname the Commissar. Back to modern-day Franco-Spanish War. Rules are, as always, no outside influence, no nukes, and same starting morale. Two countries share a tough natural border in the form of Pyrenees Mountains. Most of it is pretty high and unsurmountable for any sort of large military formation featuring vehicles. There are roads on 36 mountain passes, but those would almost certainly get blocked quickly. And even if breached, the defender could keep striking at narrow columns of invaders' vehicles, even with a fairly small force on foot, negating pretty much all of the numerical advantage the attacker might have. What complicates the Spanish position are the initial location of forces. While the French have a visible concentration of units near the Pyrenees in a typical trust-no-one approach, the Spanish army is distributed all over the country, almost as if they trust their neighbors. When moving farther away from the border, French troop levels still come more ahead. The rapid reaction forces and various air mobile forces are more numerous on the French side, but part of them would not be readily available. French military would thus likely come first to take the mountain passes, but could not gain the whole of the Pyrenees. Even if Spanish buildup of forces is a bit slower, the insufficient transport capacity over the mountains would slow down the French advance almost to a crawl. On the southern side of the mountains, the Spanish forces would be waiting, with more troops in firing positions and with heavier weapon systems. Without the air power accounted for, it's likely the French could not move an inch further. But the French do have a more powerful air force. They have more planes, and greater number of their planes are more capable. The capability descriptions are only rough guidelines. Some of the French Rafales are better than Spanish Eurofighters. At the same time, when it comes to pure interception, Spanish Eurofighters can be somewhat better than the rest of the French Rafales. But air combat is unlikely to decide the winner. The French have more cruise missiles to help with the initial push. They also have less to worry about when defending own territory, with French strong air defense network. Spanish air defenses would certainly be helpful to Spaniards. Their numbers are pretty high, though some of the batteries would probably be stuck defending some of the Spanish islands. French have an added advantage of a bigger guided bomb stock, as they perform more missions over the world and produce their own weapons. But none of those assure victory in the air for the French. The two sides would be in a bitter fight with many losses. While slightly ahead, the French could not expect to rule the skies and offer close combat support from the air with any sort of regularity. French advantage when it comes to special mission planes would help them though. Pushing into enemy territory is hard without radar coverage, and luckily France does have a strong hand there. The added benefit of a large over-the-horizon radar station near Paris would come in handy, though its minimum range and poor resolution don't make it an all-seeing eye. The ground war pretty much checked at the high Pyrenees would get funneled to the coastline. With a flatter land and better road infrastructure, the French would amass their forces there, but so would the Spanish. The Spanish army is overall smaller, but the difference isn't enough to make up for the narrow funnels where French numbers would not make much of a difference. Spanish coastal area west of the border is still fairly hilly and the valleys are quite urbanized, while a bit flatter, the area on the eastern coast is squeezed by hills. Due to pushing through against dug-in defenders, it's likely the French would suffer more casualties. Spanish artillery edge could be used quite effectively over a force funneled in narrow areas, if the French Air Force could be mostly kept at bay, which wouldn't be easy. Nominally, the French have a stronger navy, more ships, more capable ships, nuke submarines and a proper aircraft carrier. But the Spanish have the Gibraltar Strait. It's so narrow that simple artillery units and fast-acting attack helicopters might deny the French passage, especially with added minefields. Granted, closure of Gibraltar would not be realistic in the real world, but neither would be an isolated war between Spain and France. Though deep, the narrow nature of the strait also means the Spanish air assets would likely close it to most of the French subs. The French would basically have their powerful navy split into two. Their aircraft carrier would be of utmost importance if they're to go through the strait, but even with the added help from air refueling and Air Force's Rafales, it's unlikely such an operation would succeed without massive casualties. Thus, it's more likely the French would use their fleets in a more cost-effective manner, using part of their nuke subs to harass the Spanish Canary Islands, as well as keeping the Spanish Navy in check, tying them to their precious Gibraltar Strait. The rest of the French submarine fleet could go around Africa and support the big push. Even without some ships stranded in the Atlantic, the French Navy would be quite formidable in the Mediterranean. Balearic Islands would find themselves very much threatened. The 1 brigade worth of Spanish troops would get reinforced, possibly every island getting a similar force, yet that means several brigades less for the defense at the Pyrenees. But the French, once they take their time to bring back their expeditionary troops from overseas, could land up to 3 brigades worth of troops by land or sea, which might warrant the Spanish to dedicate a significant part of their forces for defense of their islands, and thus seriously weaken their northern positions. Forced to choose between the two, it's plausible the Spanish would sacrifice a party island or two in order to keep the French from getting deeper into their homeland. Such amphibious and air assault, however, would still cost the French dearly, taking out most of their highly trained assault forces and precluding them from repeating defeat anytime soon. And such assault would also cut the French Navy down to size, as it tries to provide a defense umbrella for its effort. The war in the north would see snow, as French would be unlikely to move much past the Pyrenees. Even though their tanks are more numerous and on the average slightly better, the portable anti-tank guided missiles would be the name of the game. French edge and recon satellites and recon in general would help them to an extent, but without air superiority and room to actually maneuver around the opponent, that situational awareness could not be fully exploited. The Spanish army, though visibly weaker in some regards, is more than adequately equipped to use Spain's geographical features and stop the French advance. The more numerous French paramilitary would be of little to no use for offensive ops, which would mean the war would turn into one of attrition. Here, the bigger French economy and greater population pool might finally cause Spain to start breaking after a year or two. But in a shorter war, the French could talk only of a costly minor victory. Big thanks goes to all my patrons on Patreon. Without you, we wouldn't be able to make as many videos. Do subscribe if you like my content, and if you want to be notified about new videos, don't forget to click that bell button. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.